Rachel sat by the window, the late evening light spilling across the living room. Her hands were busy with a book, though her eyes had not moved from the same page for almost 10 minutes. She wasn't reading. She was waiting. Daniel, her husband, had been out longer than usual. And though she trusted him, there was a restlessness in her chest she couldn't explain. Their marriage was calm, steady, and ordinary, exactly the life she had once dreamed of. Yet on nights like this, she sometimes wondered what had been lost along the way. The sound of the door unlocking pulled her back. Daniel walked in, his shoulders heavy, as though carrying more than just the day's work. Rachel greeted him with her usual smile, though it faltered when she saw his face. He wasn't angry, nor tired in the usual way. His eyes carried a kind of thoughtfulness that made her heart beat differently. "Long day?" she asked, closing her book and rising to take his coat. "Yeah," he said quietly, but then added, "I ran into someone today." His tone was different, careful. Rachel tilted her head. "Oh, who?" Daniel hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line before he finally said the name. Adam. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Adam, her first love, her longest heartbreak, the man who once felt like home until everything fell apart. He was the chapter she had closed, locked, and buried deep. And yet, with one word, Daniel had pulled it back into the light. She tried to keep her face calm. "Adam, that's surprising. Where did you see him?" Daniel placed his bag down and moved closer, watching her carefully. "At the cafe near my office. He was sitting outside and we talked for a bit. It felt strange, but also unfinished." He paused as though choosing his next words. "I invited him over tomorrow." Rachel froze. "You? What?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. She searched his face, wondering if he was joking. But Daniel's expression didn't falter. "I thought it might be good for you to see him," he explained. "To clear the air, maybe put the past behind you properly." Rachel stepped back, her hands folding against her chest. Her heart raced. Not because of anger, but because of the flood of emotions she didn't want to feel. Adam, the man she once thought she'd marry. The man who left her with questions that still lived quietly in her bones. She had built a new life with Daniel. Yet hearing that name again made it all feel fragile, like glass trembling under pressure. "Daniel, why would you do that?" she asked, her voice softer now, more fragile. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were steady, but there was something else hidden there, something she couldn't quite name. "Because I don't think you're as free from him as you want me to believe." The words cut deep. Rachel's mouth opened, but no reply came out. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but her silence betrayed her. Daniel turned away, loosening his tie as though ending the conversation. "He'll be here at 7 tomorrow. You don't have to say much. Just see him, talk, let it out. Then maybe we can move forward without this shadow between us." Rachel sat back down, gripping the edge of the sofa. Her mind spun, tumbling between past and present. She remembered the first time Adam had held her hand, the way he made her laugh until her cheeks hurt, the way they fought and made up in the same breath. She remembered the night it all ended, too many words, too much pride, and the unbearable silence that followed. Daniel's voice broke her thoughts. "Rachel, I love you. That's why I'm doing this. I need to know you're fully here with me, not somewhere else in your heart." She looked at him then. Truly looked at him, the man who had given her safety, stability, a home without storms. His love was steady, not wild, and maybe that was why at times she still felt a hollow ache she couldn't name. That night Rachel lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing. The thought of seeing Adam again sent waves of panic through her chest. What would she say? What would she feel? Would she even recognize the man she once thought she couldn't live without? But another question burned hotter in her mind. Why had Daniel really invited him? Was it only about closure, or was it something else? The next day passed in a blur. Rachel went about her work, but her thoughts returned to the same point again and again. 7 o'clock. She kept checking the clock, each glance pulling her deeper into the storm of memory. By the time she returned home, her nerves were strung tight, her hands restless. Daniel was calm, almost too calm. He set the table, poured wine into glasses, and spoke of nothing in particular. Rachel watched him, trying to read the truth behind his quiet composure. Did he feel threatened? Curious? Or was he, in some strange way, testing her? When the doorbell finally rang, Rachel felt her chest constrict. Her body moved before her mind caught up, and suddenly she was standing in the hallway, her hand on the doorknob. She hesitated, her breath caught, her pulse loud in her ears, and then she opened the door. Adam stood there. His hair was a little shorter, his face a little older, but the eyes those were the same. Eyes that once knew every secret corner of her heart. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy, not with anger, but with the unspoken weight of everything they had been. "Hi, Rachel," he said softly. His voice carried both familiarity and distance, like a song she had almost forgotten but still knew by heart. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Hi, Adam." Daniel appeared behind her, his tone warm yet measured. "Come in." As Adam stepped inside, Rachel felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It was as if time folded, the past and present colliding in the quiet space of their home. And though Daniel smiled politely, his eyes never left Rachel's face. The moment Adam stepped inside, Rachel felt the air change. The house that usually carried Daniel's calm energy suddenly felt filled with something unsteady, something unspoken. Adam looked around politely, but his eyes always returned to hers, and every glance stirred memories she had fought hard to bury. Daniel, meanwhile, closed the door and moved toward the living room as though nothing was unusual. He was too composed, too steady, and that only unsettled Rachel more. They sat at the table, the three of them, like old friends. But they weren't friends, not really. They were a wife, her husband, and the man she once thought she would marry. Rachel folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. Daniel poured wine, his movements calm, deliberate. He handed her a glass, then Adam, then kept one for himself. He lifted it casually. "Two old connections," he said with a faint smile. Rachel forced a polite nod, but the words felt heavy. Old connections. If only it were that simple. Adam gave a small laugh, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. They clinked glasses. The sound was sharp, almost too loud in the quiet room. At first, the conversation stayed safe. Daniel asked Adam about his work, where he lived now, if he ever thought about moving back to the city. Adam answered easily, his voice even. But Rachel noticed the way he would glance at her after every answer, as if searching for a reaction. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on her glass, the clock. Anything to keep herself steady. But time has a way of loosening tongues. Soon Daniel leaned back in his chair, letting the conversation drift. That's when Adam turned slightly toward Rachel. "It's been a long time," he said, his tone soft, almost tentative. She nodded quickly. "Yes, years. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," Adam continued. Rachel's throat tightened. Life moves on. She tried to keep it short, but even to her own ears, it sounded unfinished. Daniel said nothing. He just sipped his wine, his eyes moving between them. He wasn't angry, not tense either. He looked like someone observing a scene he had expected to watch unfold. That silence from him was louder than any words could have been. Adam leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Do you ever think about those days? About us?" Rachel froze. She could feel Daniel's gaze even without looking at him. She should have shut the question down, should have redirected the moment, but her lips parted before she could stop herself. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth hung in the air like a fragile thread. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched dot the room, felt smaller, the air heavier. Rachel remembered laughter in a small apartment. Rainy nights spent sharing secrets. Arguments that burned hot but always ended in apologies that felt like fire and healing all at once. She remembered the way Adam once looked at her like she was the only person in the world. That memory, once locked away, now stood in front of her in flesh and blood. Daniel finally set his glass down. "It's natural," he said evenly. "The past doesn't vanish just because time has passed." His words were calm, but Rachel felt their weight. He wasn't excusing her confession, he was marking it, placing it in the open where no one could pretend otherwise. Adam shifted uncomfortably, but then smiled faintly. "I guess some things stay with us no matter how much we try to bury them." Rachel tried to steer the conversation to lighter ground. But every topic seemed to circle back to the same unspoken current. Every laugh felt forced, every pause loaded with meaning. Daniel's silence remained steady, like a judge watching from the corner. The night stretched on, though the clock moved steadily toward midnight. Rachel sat stiffly in her chair, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. Adam leaned slightly forward, his presence heavy but familiar, while Daniel stayed back, calm and observant, almost too quiet. The small living room felt charged, like every word spoken or unspoken had weight. Rachel tried to focus on the flicker of the lamp, the hum of the refrigerator, anything but Adam's eyes. But he broke the silence, his voice low, cutting through her thoughts. "Do you ever wonder," he said carefully, "what would have happened if we hadn't let each other go?" The question hit her like a sudden wind. Her lips parted, but words didn't come. She could feel Daniel's gaze on her, steady, unblinking. She wanted to answer quickly, to dismiss it. But her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Adam's expression softened. "Because I do. More than I should." Rachel's chest tightened. The air seemed thinner, every breath harder to draw. She wanted to say she was happy that her life was complete, but the truth lingered in her heart, raw and undeniable. Memories flooded back, late night drives, whispered promises, laughter that echoed in places only they knew. She had buried those moments, yet here they were, alive in front of her. Daniel finally spoke, his voice measured. "The past has a way of staying alive if you let it." Rachel turned to him, startled by the calmness in his tone. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man waiting for answers he already suspected. Adam's eyes flickered to Daniel, then back to Rachel. "It's not just the past. It's what it meant. Some things don't fade, no matter how much time passes." Rachel felt the pull of his words, the ache of unfinished love. She hated herself for it, hated that she couldn't deny it. She lowered her gaze, staring at her hands, afraid of what might show on her face. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Rachel," he said softly, "do you still carry him with you?" The question cut through the air like a blade. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Daniel," he held her gaze. "I need to know." Her throat closed. She wanted to shout no, to reassure him, but honesty sat like a stone on her chest. She couldn't lie, not when Adam was right there, its presence unraveling everything she had carefully built. "I don't know," she whispered. Finally, the room fell silent. Adam's expression was tender, full of something unspoken. Daniel's face stayed calm, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. Rachel wished she could take the words back, but it was too late. Adam reached out, not touching her, but placing his hand on the table near hers. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. "Not once." Rachel's breath caught. The confession was simple, but it carried years of weight. She could feel Daniel watching, feel his silent judgment. She wanted to push Adam's words away, but her heart trembled with recognition. Daniel's voice broke the moment. "This is why I invited him here," he said, his tone controlled. "I wanted to see what would happen if the past stood in front of us. I needed the truth." Rachel looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You planned this?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly, "because I couldn't keep living with questions. I saw it in you, Rachel. The way you avoided his name, the way you grew quiet when memories came up. I needed to know if your heart was really here with me or still with him." Rachel's stomach turned. Part of her felt betrayed, tested, yet another part knew he wasn't wrong. She had carried Adam's shadow all these years, even if she never admitted it. Adam shifted, his voice steady. "I don't want to ruin your life, Rachel, but I can't sit here and pretend I don't still care." Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Daniel, then at Adam, torn between the two worlds. Daniel represented security, loyalty, a love that didn't waver. Adam represented passion, history, a flame that still burned. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. "I built a life with Daniel," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I chose him. But did you let me go?" Adam asked gently. The question sliced through her. She opened her eyes, tears threatening to fall. She didn't have an answer. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "That's the problem," he said quietly. "You never really chose. You just tried to bury one part of yourself to live with the other." Rachel shook her head, her voice breaking. "That's not true." But deep inside, she knew it was. The silence that followed was unbearable. Adam's eyes pleaded with her. Daniel's eyes demanded the truth. And she sat in the middle, trapped. Finally, Adam stood. "Maybe I should go," he said softly. His voice was calm, but his eyes lingered on Rachel. Heavy with everything he couldn't say. Rachel's chest tightened, panic rushing in. She didn't want him to stay, yet she didn't want him to leave either. She was caught, her heart divided, and no choice felt right. Daniel rose too, his voice calm. "Go if you must. But the truth is already here. We can't ignore it anymore." Adam hesitated at the door, then looked back one last time. His gaze locked on Rachel's, a silent message passing between them and finished. Unresolved, undeniable. When the door finally closed behind him, Rachel turned to Daniel, her body trembling. "Why did you do this to me?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Because I needed to know if you were truly mine. And now I do." Rachel's heart sank. She didn't know if that was a statement of love or the beginning of an ending. She looked toward the door. Toward the silence Adam had left behind, and realized the past wasn't gone. It was alive, sitting between her and Daniel, shaping the air they breathed, and she knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of the storm. The door closed behind Adam, leaving the house in a silence that felt heavier than words. Rachel stood frozen, her hands still near the chair, her breath caught in her chest. Daniel walked past her calmly, collected the empty glasses, and set them in the kitchen sink. His movements were deliberate, almost to normal, as if he hadn't just invited her past into their living room and torn open wounds she had hidden for years. Rachel finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Why did you watch us like that? Why didn't you stop it? You just sat there." Daniel dried his hands slowly with a towel, then turned to her. His eyes were steady, but there was no softness in them now. "Because I needed to see. I needed to know if your heart was truly here with me or if it was still reaching for him." Her chest tightened. "And what did you see?" Daniel didn't look away. "I saw a woman torn in two. One who loves the safety I give her, but still aches for the fire she left behind." Tears filled her eyes. "That's not fair, Daniel. I chose you. I married you." "Yes," he said quietly, "but marriage doesn't erase history. And it doesn't erase feelings you never faced. You didn't choose me instead of him, Rachel. You chose me because he left. And that's not the same thing." His words pierced deeper than she expected. She wanted to deny them, but her silence betrayed her again. The truth echoed inside her. She had never truly let go of Adam. Rachel sank onto the sofa, her hands trembling. She thought of the life she built with Daniel, the dinners, the weekends, the steady love that never faltered. But tonight, seeing Adam again, she realized the ache she carried wasn't gone. It was simply buried. And Daniel had seen it too. Daniel sat across from her, his voice calm but firm. "I don't want half of your heart. I deserve all of it. So tell me, Rachel, can you give it?" Her throat closed. She stared at him, the man who had been her anchor, and yet she couldn't say yes. "Not fully. Not tonight, Daniel." She whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. Daniel leaned back, his jaw tightening, his eyes clouded with disappointment. "That's all I needed to hear." Rachel's tears finally spilled. "Don't say that, please. I love you. Do you? He asked softly, but the question didn't sound like doubt, it sounded like a verdict. Rachel buried her face in her hands. She wanted to rewind time, to erase Adam's visit, to hold on to the illusion that her marriage was whole. But Daniel had pulled the curtain away, and now everything lay bare. The night dragged on. They spoke little after that. Daniel went to bed, leaving her sitting in the living room alone, staring at the door Adam had walked through. She hated herself for it. But her heart replayed his words, his eyes. The way his presence still lit something inside her she thought was long gone. When dawn broke, Rachel found Daniel in the kitchen, already dressed for work. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. He poured his coffee and finally said, "I won't fight for a heart that's not fully mine. You need to decide what you want, Rachel. And you need to decide soon." Her lips trembled. "I don't want to lose you." "Then prove it," he replied, his voice low, controlled. He kissed her forehead briefly, a gesture that felt both tender and final. Then walked out the door. The silence that followed was crushing. Rachel sat at the table, staring at the untouched coffee he had poured for her. She thought of Adam's words, "I never stop caring about you." She thought of Daniel's "I don't want half of your heart." Both echoed in her mind, pulling her in opposite directions. She stepped outside later that morning, the cool air brushing her face, but nothing cleared the storm inside. She walked past familiar streets, yet everything felt strange. Memories clung to her like shadows of Daniel's quiet loyalty. The life she could have had. The life she could have had. That evening, Daniel came home late. He didn't ask about her day, didn't kiss her cheek like he usually did. He sat across from her at dinner, the silence between them louder than any argument. Finally, he set down his fork. "I can't live like this, Rachel. I can't be second to a memory. You need to choose. Him or me. Not both." Her heart pounded. She wanted to say his name to give him the answer he deserved, but her lips wouldn't form the words. She loved Daniel, she truly did. But Adam's shadow refused to let go, and Daniel knew it. That night, she lay awake beside her husband, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's back was turned to her, his breathing steady but distant. She reached out a hand, hesitated, and then pulled it back. She realized then that trust was fragile, and hers was already cracked. The days that followed blurred. Daniel grew quieter, more distant. Adam didn't call, didn't appear, but his presence lingered in Rachel's mind like a whisper that refused to fade. She carried on with her routine, but every moment felt like pretending. One evening, Daniel finally broke the silence. "I want you to think about what kind of love you want, Rachel. The safe kind or the burning kind. But don't forget, safety doesn't mean it's less real, and burning doesn't mean it lasts." His words struck her. He wasn't begging. He wasn't angry. He was simply giving her the truth and the responsibility. Rachel sat quietly after he left the room, her heart torn apart. She realized that no matter what she chose, something inside her would break. If she stayed with Daniel, she would live with the ghost of Adam. If she reached for Adam, she would destroy the man who had given her stability and loyalty as the sun set. Rachel stood by the window, her reflection staring back at her. Her own eyes looked unfamiliar, caught between two loves, two lives, two truths. She whispered to herself, "How do you choose between your past and your present?" The house stayed silent, offering no answer. And deep inside, Rachel knew that whatever choice she made, she would never be the same again.